3 Central African time on a rather cold Johannesburg morning. And thank you so much for staying with us. We're going to be switching gears now to touch on a very, very concerning story. South Africa's media industry is facing very, very tough questions around ethics, around accountability, just general public trust. Journalist advocacy group, Journalists Against Apartheid, has sharply criticized South Africa's National Editors Forum, SANEF for short, and it is over what they call an inadequate response to corruption allegations linked to former chairperson Makudu Sefara. I think the story broke sometime last week, and it was just a controversial story that follows the findings by the SIU unit that around 550,000 rand meant to support journalists was allegedly diverted from a National Lotteries Commission grant, and it was siphoned to one of his companies. And Journalists Against Apartheid says the issue goes beyond one individual and speaks to just a broader concern around ethics, around those that are supposed to be running these institutions, institutions that are transparent, institutions that are credible and accountable within the media industry. And joining us now is Deshnee Subraman from Journalists Against Apartheid, very, very good friend of the station, and really, really excited to be chatting to her this morning. Deshnee, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Salelo. Thank you.
No, the pleasure is all ours. It's been a while since we spoke, so I'm really excited to see you. I want to jump right into it. For our listeners that are hearing about this story for the first time, what exactly is Journalists Against Apartheid accusing SANEF of? Looking at the story that came out last week, and just generally the way that organization has been carrying itself, it's been quite problematic.
Yeah, I mean, we're not accusing them. Let me say that. I think we're just really disappointed in the way they're dealing with things. And at this point, we are saying to them that they are not doing what they say they are doing. The whole reason SANEF was set up was to make sure that there is media freedom. They fought for media freedom. You and me can have this conversation where everyone can speak because of their actions. And, for that, we're very grateful. But in the situation that we find ourselves in now, there is a huge question around how does the organization work now? And I think it's important for us to also note that we are 32 years into our democracy. And it seems like everything in its 30s, whether it's like millennials or SANEF or, whatever it is really facing this moment of confrontation, with what we built then to where we are now. And what is it that we want for the future? And so this is not specific to SANEF. I mean, it is specific to SANEF in a way, because we do expect SANEF to uphold ethics in a way that is almost beyond reproach. We don't believe anyone is beyond reproach, but we do expect SANEF to uphold these ethics to the highest possible degree. And so there is a huge reckoning now for SANEF and for the rest of us as journalists to think about, what is the role of SANEF? And if it is going to abdicate its responsibility, as we say in our statement, because of what's going on, what does that mean for the fraternity? I'm not sure if your viewers are well aware of what the story is, or do you want me to get into that a little bit?
Please, if you can.
Sure. So a Ground Up, I'm sure if people are community news followers, I'm sure you know about Ground Up, which is a very important community news publication. They focus specifically as an audience on hard news for working class communities, but actually for the greater, South Africa. But their focus and the intentionality is around working class people and kind of political and social struggles on that. And so as an organization, they're very important. Its director, Nathan Geffen, accused SANEF of knowing about, as you spoke about, Sefara's involvement in the lotteries a payment situation, which basically the SIU has been investigating since 2019. And, in the National Lotteries Commission, basically what's been said is that money was taken from there and paid into people and organizations improperly. And what we found now is that Sefara, the SIU released information that Sefara did get money from the Lotteries Commission, but it was sent through another organization that the SIU is investigating. And that organization has since paid back the 1.7 million it's accused of taking improperly. So essentially, Safara's money has been repaid by the organization that got the money in the first place. And so Nathan Geffen says he brought this up at SANEF in 2023, and he, SANEF leadership did not speak to him and basically told him to stop speaking about this. But the problem here is that, Selaelo, this is not a one-time thing, Safara afterwards then is then elected as SANEF chair. And in any journalism situation, if you've got these kinds of cobwebs around your head, this is not a way in which you should be even eligible for the seat.
Very, very true. I want to talk about SANEF as an organization. You mentioned that 31 years into democracy, it almost became or becomes a moment of reckoning. It becomes a moment of looking at what we've built and where we're going. Quoting you directly, but looking at SANEF generally and the organization over the years and what it has morphed to, and the influence of big corporates, within the organization. Do you think there's a moment where they got it wrong, where just generally how the organization has been carrying itself left a lot to be desired?
To be honest, SANEF does not have any documentation on its website that shows how their executive management is elected. It does not show a list of members who are supposed to be elected. SANEF has rules in place where, their executive membership cannot be in positions of power for more than 5 years consecutively. So if you're Treasurer General, you cannot also be the secretary and also chair within 5 years. You need to be able, after 5 years, you cannot be on there. But there's no documents that show this. And so unfortunately, we're in a moment where, we've trusted SANEF to do the right thing. The ethics have always been there, and we work with these people in these organizations. But what we are seeing now is that if it is a case of, as you allude to, if it is a case of, to give an example, Avusa or a Media 24, whatever it is, fighting against Ground Up, then it becomes a bigger question, and we don't have any evidence to say that question actually is valid at this point.
No, most definitely. And just your concern primarily, is it about the allegations themselves of, the corruption and the maladministration, or about SANEF's response to them? What would have been the accurate way for them to go about things?
Yeah, it's definitely SANEF's response, because we also don't have any more information than what everybody else has now. This is something that needs a criminal investigation because the money has been paid back. There's been an admission of guilt. And so that is something that then will go through the relevant legal processes. But it is about SANEF's response. And for me, and I guess as JAA, the question is, if they knew that there were questions around Safara, not just in him getting this money, because at that time he didn't know, but around Sunday World and the payments that were coming to Sunday World in 2019, then we need to consider, how was this handled? Is this something that we need to talk about? And for me, I think SANEF should have really put the brakes on anything related to Safara at that point as management and gone into this in depth. I mean, it's clear that from his stepping down as SANEF chair, but also his suspension from his publication at the Sunday Times, it's clear that he didn't declare this to anybody. So that already tells you that we've got a big issue here. One final point I want to make is that in 2019, SANEF had its own ethics panel led by former Judge Kathy Satchwell. And in there are 69 recommendations for SANEF to look at how they can strengthen media ethics and how they can make the media a stronger place. And 5 years later, the question is, where are those recommendations? Were they put in place, and where are we now?
My concern is, we're not seeing as much uproar, apart from JAA, there isn't really been any much noise around the story and holding SANEF accountable. Do you believe maybe the media industry applies the same scrutiny to itself that it applies to politicians and government, or it doesn't, looking at the story and how it has panned out?
I think some organizations do, and some organizations are held to account by these ones, the larger companies. But some people don't. And I think this is situation in SANEF really points to this. I mean, I also want to be clear that, Geffen isn't really an angel in all of this, even while he was in SANEF, which he resigned from, after this issue with Sefara. Even while he was there were lots of questions. And, as a community media organization yourself, there have been, and I mean, I've been at the conference, there have been a lot of questions around how SANEF supports organizations. What is SANEF doing to, help community media? Where does SANEF come in? And, in their statements, they always say, SANEF is not a union, right? So, these are the kinds of questions, and we understand, there's capacity, there's a lot of things that come into play here. But these are not allegations or not allegations. These are not questions that other media have not been asking before. And we get to a point now where it is clear that SANEF has had questions against them. A lot of people have asked these questions. And if they can set back someone like Nathan Geffen, who is a director of an organization, then what does that mean for the rest of us? That's really the bigger question.
Very, very true. And I think we're at a moment where South Africa in general is already, facing a declining trust in institutions. How damaging is this moment for journalism as a whole? Is it a dent that is, going to leave a big stain on the fraternity?
Honestly, how SANEF responds to this is what is going to decide that. But this is a massive problem, As you say, if you look at some of the Reuters publications, they do like media reports every year. And if you look at that, yes, worldwide interest in the media and support for the media is declining. South Africa is not declining as fast. But we have a situation now where, it really gives power to politicians to say, oh, you guys are the captured media. What does that mean for everyone else who actually is authentically and properly doing their job? It will allow right-wingers and right-wing publications, by the way, that are starting to creep up in South Africa, the ability to say that the mainstream media is actually, here's the problem, your established media houses, they are actually the issue. It just allows for too much or too many holes in this basket that we have that we actually cannot afford at this point. And what do we do moving forward? How are we going to introspect, and what kind of transparency are we hoping to see? And with SANEF, I hope that we will get some good transparency so that we all know what's going on.
You're touching on what's supposed to be my last question. How do you hold the watchdog accountable? What do you do?
Who's watching the watchdog, right? This is a very big
watchdog, honestly, yes.
This is a big question. I mean, and like, not to be very dramatic, but it's basically like the SAHRC having a question about human rights itself, right? And so now it is a huge thing, and we really need to introspect as a community, as media organizations. I'm hoping, I'm sure you saw in our statement, we asked that SANEF basically take all of us into their confidence, host a meeting, and explain to us what's going on. And I hope that they take that on, because I think as a community, as journalists, we need to be able to feel confident in what is going on and what the move forward is, so that we can also educate the public about what is going on, because the public doesn't understand how the media works, and they shouldn't. It's not their job to do so. It's our job to explain to them how we work, and it's our job to be as transparent as possible with them. So hopefully SANEF will take these requests quite seriously, or demands. Actually, we're calling them demands. This is not something we're asking for.
Deshnee, thank you so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure. And I hope we chat again soon.
Cool. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was Deshnee Subraman from Journalists Against Apartheid, speaking to us about growing concerns around accountability and transparency within South Africa's media sector. This is following that fallout linked to corruption allegations, if you may, corruption allegations within SANEF, Mr. Sefara himself, and all the monies that were supposed meant to grow the South African media industry, organizations like ourselves, who are grassroots media, supposed to be benefiting from some of those funds, because we're doing really, really critical work. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how SANEF responds to Mr. Makudu Sefara. And again, I think a very, very important note that Deshnee made. How are we supposed to watch the watchdog? Essentially, how do you hold SANEF responsible? And it'll be up to them how they respond to these allegations and take everyone to their confidence, because all institutions seem to be eroding in South Africa, and the journalism fraternity, the media space, has been, one for the longest of time that it was, the last grasp of hope for a lot of South Africans. You have journalists that are doing incredible work that are exposing the rot, the corruption within government and private sector week in, week out. And you don't want to come to a space where we've even lost that. We've lost the journalism fraternity and the good work that other journalists are doing because our watchdog, the editors forum, is not doing its work, and there are holes that you can pick out, I think, throughout the years where they were supposed to be doing certain things and they haven't done them. You're seeing certain personalities that are within the organization that have question marks around them, and you're like, it's not what SANEF should be doing or should be associating itself with. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting going forward how they respond to this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.